Morning, Godfrey.
Good morning. Good morning, Neil. How very nice to see you again.
Yeah,
Marvelous.
yeah, yeah. Well, we were great friends and allies together in UKIP years ago when UKIP was riding high. And I think our activities at long last have borne fruit, haven't they?
Well, indeed they have. And of course, we got in our old UKIP days, we eventually forced a referendum. The referendum was won. A Brexit of sort has been achieved. But because I started in the Brexit game in the late 1980s, and I suppose if you'd said we'd got this far, I would have been delighted. But then, being a perfectionist, I'd like the agreement to be a bit better. But anyway, we are where we are. And of course, where UKIP dropped the pass in 2000, I think round about 2012 to 2014, was it stopped being radical. It
Yeah,
started off grassroots. It was a grassroots party. The butcher, the baker, the hairdresser, the cab driver, people right at the grassroots level. And that's what gave it its strength. And of course, by 2014, the hierarchy got the whiff of ermine and started trying to become politically correct and mainstream, which is, of course, when I parted company. Nobody's ever accused me of being politically correct.
indeed.
So it was no good to me. But I still think, and it's come back a bit, has it not? There's now room for a radical party, and I'm delighted that you're at the helm, and maybe you can bring it back to the radical grassroots cause in how it started. Marvelous.
Well, that's what I want to do. I remember very clearly the day when Nigel Farage summarily executed you for making a joke, which everybody laughed at, including the journalists who were present at the event.
And
Uh,
Mrs. Farage.
yeah, and so it was a tragedy that UKIP took the turn that it did. I quite agree with you. We do need to be the radical alternative because the rest of the political spectrum is a consensus. I mean, I see this now in the Welsh Parliament, where the Conservatives provide no real opposition to the Labour Party. Plaid Cymru, the Welsh Nationalists, are fully in bed with Labour. The one Liberal Democrat is actually a member of the Labour cabinet. And it's only me and one or two others who are independents who break this consensus view. On COVID, for example, we've got a handful of people who are prepared to take a skeptical view of what the government has done, turning the country into a kind of open prison. And actually not so open anymore. We're all now under house arrest. And it's amazing that the political establishment goes along with this when it's based on absolute tosh.
Heartbreaking. We have an annual holiday in Wales. We always have a holiday in Wales because we're keen mountain walkers and coastal walkers.
Yeah.
We're very unhappy to see that, because it seems to me, I don't know very much about Welsh politics, but it seems to me it's a bit like Scotland, where you have this urban area in the south, or where the urban areas, who vote Labour in a sort of as a matter of knee-jerk reaction, because that's what they voted for generations, without any thought behind their voting procedure at all. And so consequently, you've got most of Pembrokeshire, rural and North Wales and all the other parts of Wales who seem to be like, it's the same, the Glasgow votes, the urban votes seem to dominate, rule the roost in Scotland. And all the intelligent, pragmatic people have been disenfranchised. And you can't close the Welsh border for very long. I mean, lots and lots of people like me love Wales, love to go to Wales. We like to hire our cottages or hotels and drink in the pubs and go to the restaurants. We think Wales is bloody great, and keeping us out. But the sad thing is, with all these dreadful people, Mark Drakeford, I think his name is, their rations, their salary arrives every month without fail. But they've got no skin in the game.
No. Well, the Parliament in Cardiff, so-called, is very little different from the Parliament at Westminster. It's stuffed full of people who've never had a proper job in their lives and have lived high on the hog on public sector salaries and gold-plated pensions, or they'd worked for think tanks or charities that have become hugely politicized as the government has outsourced many functions which would previously have been done by departments of state. And we've got a whole miasma, so-called third sector now, which is fundamentally a kind of left-wing privatized bureaucracy, which is in cahoots with the government. And a media which is totally uncritical, Trinity Mirror, or whatever it's now called, Reach, I believe, owns most of the media outlets in Wales. They slavishly support the Labour government. I mean, the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford's son, is in prison having been convicted of rape. Do you know that never appeared in the headlines, or indeed even in the substance of any of the main websites? Because it was too embarrassing to the cause, I suppose. Nothing to do with Drakeford himself, of course, but nevertheless, if Boris Johnson were to commit some minor sexual infraction, that would be screaming headlines all over the world. But in Wales, these things are all suppressed, and it's even worse than that in public policy terms, of course, because Wales politically hasn't moved on from the 1970s, and Wales is now the poorest part of the UK. We're older, we're sicker, and poorer than other parts of the country. It's a complete backwater. That's what I've been trying to change, and only radical policies will do that.
I think the Americans I love American phraseology. Sometimes they get it absolutely right, don't they? It's deep state. Yeah. There's no better phrase, is there? It's deep state. And that's what we're up against. And yeah. I don't know, it's difficult to know where to start the fight. We thought the fight was coming to an end with Brexit, didn't we? We thought that we could then move forward from there, but all we've done, it seems now, is to replace Brussels with Westminster. Which is something that we both, I seem to remember. This love of control and political control has definitely transferred to people who, it seems, are no more than sociopaths. I mean, Matt Hancock is a sociopath.
Yeah. Well, it's extraordinary how this is a kind of global miasma which suffuses the entire planet, because international organizations are fully engaged in this as well. The World Health Organization, for example. And it's very interesting that the second biggest funder of the World Health Organization, behind the United States, isn't a country at all. You know, it's not Germany or China or Russia. It's Bill Gates and the Bill Gates Foundation. He's got his own political agenda, which he's pushing. And so he has actually purchased a part of the global governmental apparatus, and governments worldwide, with exceptions like Donald Trump, are united in responses from global warming to COVID, which are utterly irrational, not at all science-based, and inimical to the prosperity of the world, and in particular the West. And so Brexit is small beer, actually, compared with this. The European Union is only one part of a wider global problem that we've got to deal with.
I'm afraid so, yeah. That's how it appears to me. I'm disappointed. I have to say I'm disappointed. I thought when the British voted leave, it cheered me up, because I thought perhaps the old spirit, the old British spirit, was still there, in spite of all the propaganda and money that was poured into the Remain campaign, that still we could think for ourselves, and we were ready to go it alone. But now I'm very disappointed. Every time I go into town and I see people with zombie masks on,
yes,
all these masks, which all informed medical science tells us is ludicrous, and they don't work. We know they don't. We know masks won't stop a virus. That is just a statement of fact. As an old farmer friend of mine said, it's like trying to keep out mosquitoes with chicken wire. It's utterly ridiculous. And viruses come in through the eyes anyway, not the mouth or the nose. So we all know that. Everybody knows that. But there they are, people walking around. We were told at the beginning masks are a waste of time. The government said masks are a waste of time. But of course, what happens is now everybody's masked, and that perpetuates the fear, which is the reason for masks. It makes everybody suspicious of everybody else. It is natural. It's cutting off communication, not just spoken communication, facial communication, the smile, the smile of recognition, all the things that make humankind work have been cut off. You take off the facial situation, and then you stop people going out. You lock them up at home, and you stop them going to the pub, which is where people communicate with each other one-to-one, regardless of rank. The great thing about the British pub is you leave your rank in the car park. It doesn't matter whether you're a hairdresser or a surgeon. Your view is equal to anybody else's inside that pub, and it's Christian name terms only. That the pub is a marvelous institution. They've closed that. Now that's quite deliberate. That's quite deliberate. They've deliberately closed the pubs, and it's not just COVID. This has been going on for decades. They don't like us getting together and talking.
Who would have thought we'd see the day where the banks insist on people going in to demand money with a mask? So,
you couldn't invent it, really, could you?
Rather different from the world in which we grew up, Godfrey.
Yes,
you're absolutely right. I mean, I represent Mid and West Wales. Is 75% of the land mass of Wales, but I've got all the empty bits. So I've got 0.5% of the UK population and 20% of its sheep. But the way that the public has responded to the COVID crisis, meekly accepting the orders that have been handed down from on high to invade civil liberties to an even greater degree than we ever saw during the Second World War, they meekly accepted. The people have become sheep. Now it's almost impossible to distinguish between the sheep and the human being over most of the country, insofar as credulity is concerned, at any rate. And it's vitally important that we do something politically to try to fight against this. Why people believe what government tells them when we know it's an institutionalized lying machine, I have no idea. The only sensible way to approach any statement by government is to disbelieve it until it's proved by some independent source.
I made this point in March, way back in March, and I got thousands of hate emails when I said we didn't even close the pubs in the war. Now we made our own decision. Restaurants, theatres, we made our own decision. And if you thought it was too dangerous, you didn't go into a pub or didn't go into theatre. But we still did. We did. But it was left to the individual choice. My father, who was a fighter pilot in the war, when he was on leave, used to have a pint with my grandfather, and his little way of handling it was to only have a drink in a pub where there wasn't too much glass, not too much glass partitioning and too much glass in case there was a bomb blast. But that was how he handled it, which is fair enough. And of course, we know that sometimes we would make an announcement, say the show will go on in the theatre. If you want to leave, by all means, the alarm, the siren's just gone, but the show will continue if you want to stay. And a lot of people stayed. It seems, I don't quite understand why nobody can name anybody who's died who was previously healthy. You can stop anybody, get into any argument or debate with them and say, do you know anybody who is healthy hitherto who has died? And of course they don't. How could they? The chances of that would be 1 in 300,000.
Correct.
So, it isn't. But people, you can't have a debate with somebody's got their mask on and believes they're going to die regardless. Communication with them is futile. Any more than it is with a sheep in your constituency. You might as well go and talk to a sheep.
Yes, quite. Well, the facts are quite unambiguous in the statistics collected by the Office of National Statistics. If you're of normal working age, under 65, then you're at almost no risk whatsoever of coming to any serious harm, even if you do contract the corona.
Exactly.
We know that there are only 338 people in the whole of 2020 who died from COVID or COVID-related conditions who are under the age of 65, 338. Everybody who's died of COVID is over 65 to all intents and purposes, and indeed much older than 65. I mean, 40% of the deaths are people who are over 85.
Exactly.
And in fact, that's higher than the average age of mortality at birth. So people are dying beyond the normal lifespan, and that's regarded somehow as a terrible thing which has got to be stopped. Well, a sensible attitude towards death is something that you adopt naturally as you get older, I can tell you from personal experience. But governments seem to want to indulge the fantasy that we can make people live forever. And therefore, what matters is survival. The fact that your body twitches, it doesn't really matter what the quality of your life is. And 25%
exactly.
25% of the deaths are people with dementia. They don't know that they're even on the planet, let alone that they've got COVID.
Very disappointing indeed, this reaction, because quality of life, nobody talks about the quality of life. I've missed 3 or 4 funerals just since March of very old friends. It means their memorial services can't go ahead either. Some of them were very well known in the community, presidents of rugby clubs and stuff like that. Heartbreaking. I've missed 3 weddings from young folks, not family, but young people that I've known, which I feel very strongly about. I love to have young friends and still at my age to be invited to weddings as a guest, not as a friend of the parents. And all those 3 have gone. And I did a video on this as well. I sort of an open video to the government that they misunderstand. I'm 71. They misunderstand. I'm missing regimental reunions. I'm missing the pub. I don't want this quality of life. And people once said, oh, what happens if you get COVID? Well, if I get COVID, and in the very unlikely circumstance I die from it, I'll go, well, fair enough. I've had a good innings. I've had fun. It's been marvelous. And if you go around and look at the at those headstones on the Somme and at Ypres, those kids who were killed at 18, 19, 20, 21, at 71, I've had a jolly good nut. I mean, if you play cricket, and I don't play much cricket, occasional game, but so I'd be very happy runs. Very happy indeed. Thank you very much.
Yeah, indeed. Now, well, we're the same age, Godfrey, the great vintage of 1949. I'm not ready to turn up my toes as yet, because I've still got a world to save, which is why I've taken up the burden of being the leader of UKIP for the time being, to try to stir things up. And I think people of our age have nothing to lose from stirring things up. And so that's why I think we offer so much still in the political system, in a conventional sense through a political party as I'm doing, or on the internet as you're very successfully doing yourself.
One of the things that nobody's talking about, which we both know is coming down the path at an amazing rate, is the forthcoming collapse of central banking, the central banking system and fiat currencies. Nobody really is talking about it at the moment outside the immediate technical sphere of people like us and the Mises Institute and so on and so forth. We're the only people talking about it, but that's largely because people don't understand it. There are very few, certainly economists, who understand it. Almost no academics in this country, and mainly in North America, they don't understand it. There are a couple, I think. Alistair Heath probably understands it in the mainstream media, and possibly Liam Halligan.
Yeah.
But I suspect that their lips are sealed by their editors. And that's where I think we are at the moment. But what we do know is, in our country alone, we know that if you include public funding initiatives and we include public sector pensions, we know that our national debt is approaching 3 trillion, which is a number beyond the human imagination. And if you put that into context of GDP as a percentage of GDP, we're looking at well over 200% of GDP, which is a bit of an idiotic figure anyway, but that's another debate.
Yeah.
The problem that we have is that that is actually like Greece. We are no better. We're no more. We're no better off financially than Greece. We are deeply in the poo when it comes to debt. And of course, modern monetary theory has it that debt doesn't matter to the state. It matters to you and I, or our small businesses, or medium-sized businesses, or even a big business, but it doesn't matter to the state. Now, modern monetary theory, of course, is no such thing. It's Keynesian theory, and it's 100 years old. So there's nothing new about it. But of course, politically, it's something for nothing. It means the government continues spending, it continues their welfare programs, it continues squandering like high-speed rail, totally unreformed welfare state, totally unreformed national health. You can go on throwing money at it because you can print it and borrow it. This, of course, as we know, is not true. And sooner or later, the world's going to find out. And of course, it's even worse in America, where the dollar is tumbling because they keep on printing what they call quantitative easing. Of course, what you and I, Neil, would call counterfeiting. Yeah. We'd call it counterfeiting. No political party is facing up to this. We were beginning to face up to it in UKIP in 2010, when I was being interviewed by the likes of Alistair Heath and people who actually knew what they were talking about. But that was actually dumbed down immediately by the UKIP, the then UKIP hierarchy, which of course was moving substantially to mainstream on these matters. There was no radical reform of banking, no radical reform of money, no interest in the national debt. And I was told when I was there as a financial spokesman for UKIP, the response I got was, Godfrey, we can't sell that on the doorstep. When I was talking about radical tax reform, we can't sell that on the doorstep. And I tried to explain then, I wasn't in politics. I didn't leave investment banking to go into politics to sell fake stuff on the doorstep. I've never sold fake stuff. And of course, our strength was Brexit, which was strong. That was a strong commitment, and we won through in the end. Not one single political party at the moment is telling the truth about how dire our finances are and how dire the Western world's finances are. I think that this could be to do with reset, the new normal, and it makes you actually link COVID to it. Why are they insisting on these levers of power? Why are they insisting on house arrest? Why are they insisting on all these things? What is coming down the path? What is reset? What is the new normal? And what's the major trigger? Not a fake pandemic, this is going to be a real problem. It's going to be the collapse of fiat currency. And that is what I think is behind this. Not necessarily with the political level with which we have. Not Boris. Boris wouldn't understand modern monetary theory or Austrian school economics if it bit him in the arse. He hasn't a clue. Bless him. Not a clue. And neither has the Chancellor, notwithstanding he's ex-Goldman Sachs. The vampire squid. So he is a very, very intelligent and rather nice man. Of course, he's just a crook from Goldman Sachs, as indeed they all are. So this is what I think is coming down that thing. Now, what I'd be interested to know is if you can get UKIP back on stream with financial fiscal reform and currency reform and national debt. Again, I could understand it's not an easy sell on the doorstep when people are used to free stuff.
Yeah. But as we all know, Godfrey, at the end of the day, there is no such thing as a free lunch, and you can't spend money twice. Although this is what the government seems to think that it can convince people is the reality. I was an economist before I became a lawyer. What you say about Boris, of course, is quite right. But as a Latinist himself, he will remember the Emperor Diocletian, who attempted to control inflation by introducing an incomes policy, which completely failed. And coin clipping under the Roman Empire was exactly the same as what is going on in digital format now. Eventually, the chickens will come home to roost, and perhaps sooner than we think. I mean, there's a big difference between what's going on now and the way the government spent its way out of the financial crisis of 2008, because the response of the government in 2008 was basically to buy up all the dud loans and debts of the bank. So it was an asset swap. What is happening now is not an asset swap, it's pure creation of money from nothing. It's Mugabe-nomics. It's exactly what happened in Zimbabwe, which completely destroyed the state's finances and made what was at one time the breadbasket of Africa into the basket case of Africa, from which they're still suffering today. We went on holiday to Victoria Falls some time ago, and some of the tourist tap you can buy there are, $5 trillion Zimbabwe notes from that era. They were worthless as money, but you can buy them as tourist mementos. Well, maybe the pound and the dollar will end up like that eventually. I mean, the United States thinks it's immune to financial crises because it's the world's anchor currency. But what happens when people lose faith in a currency which is based totally on credit is that other currencies come up in their place. Why are cryptocurrencies appearing and now being used in unprecedented amounts? It's because a lot of people see the crash coming and they want a store of value, which is what currency is supposed to be. If you can't confidently be sure that your currency is going to retain its value, then you get out of it and find something else. It used to be gold, and to an extent, gold still performs that function. Gold has done quite well in the last couple of years, but cryptocurrencies are now appearing, I think, to take the place of the fiat currencies, which are being corrupted by the people who create them. And the whole point about Bitcoin is that it's supposed to be a fixed stock of well, call it cash. It's not cash, of course, so that it can't be mucked about with by the monetary authorities. But the Bank of England is effectively the creature of the government, although it's supposed to be independent. The Federal Reserve, similarly, is monetizing what the US government wants. And as for the European Central Bank, well, enough said on that. We don't need to say anything more than everything in the EU is a political construct designed to get rid of the nation state and create a nirvana for technocrats covering an entire continent. So you're absolutely right, Godfrey. This is an issue which we must talk about because we've effectively doubled the national debt in a year. And Rishi hasn't yet finished with his monetary creation program. It's very easy to be popular just by spending other people's money. But then I think, was it Margaret Thatcher who pointed out that the trouble with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. And this so-called conservative government will be in much the same position pretty soon. It's astonishing that the magic money tree, which they derided Corbyn for up until the last general election just 12 months ago, has been fertilized by the Conservative government in a manner and to an extent that Corbyn could never have dreamt of. But we know that this is going to end in tears and before too long. So yes, I do want to make UKIP into a repository of common sense on this. It's not rocket science, as you rightly said. It's a perverted form of Keynesianism. Keynesianism, as we know it, is now, as you say, 100 years old, roughly. But Keynes believed in balancing the budget over the cycle. He believed in deficit spending, but in the good years, he believed in the opposite. He thought he could balance things up. That in his technocratic mind, he was able to see the future in a way that ordinary folks couldn't. In reality, we know that bureaucrats and governments are as blind, if not more blind, than anybody else. But eventually, you can't ultimately defy the economic forces which are just as strong as natural forces like gravity. What we will do is bankrupt future generations. You and I are 71 years old. Maybe we won't be around when the full effects of all this are felt. Certainly not. We won't be involved in repaying the cash or paying the ultimate bills. We'll have lived at a time when we can be high on the hog at our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren's expense. It's a terrible moral situation to find ourselves in. But nobody seems to talk about financial morality in this respect anymore. I want UKIP to start doing that.
Well, it's a shame that we didn't stick to our guns, because everything that we were saying, or I was saying, I was the spokesman, but I know you and I were very much simpatico on this, was, of course, we could have looked back on these other things, not just Brexit. We could have looked back and say, look, everything we've said has come about. And of course, you mentioned gold, but of course, gold is the 5,000-year benchmark against currency. And you have to take gold as that benchmark. Crypto is very interesting, and it's the new kid on the block. And I hold some. But gold is your benchmark as far as these matters are concerned. And of course, fiat currencies on average now have lost 80% of their value against gold in this century alone. That's just since 2000, the year 2000. That is quite extraordinary. And of course, as you will well know, since the Americans came off the gold standard in 1971, Nixon closed the gold window. The purchasing power of the 1971 dollar is now in the region of 6 cents. But of course, it happens a little bit like the salami slice, or perhaps people watching this prefer the boiled frog, which you boil it so slowly, so gently, that it doesn't know it's being boiled to death. But of course, the intrinsic worth of currency, if it's paper, can only end up to its intrinsic worth, of course, as paper, which is meaningless and nothing. And of course, who's been acquiring gold? The Chinese have been acquiring gold. And if they had a Chinese-backed currency back with gold, it would then paradoxically become a hard currency. Russia's been doing the same thing. Since America weaponized the petrodollar, and they weaponized it, people saw the writing on the wall and then got out of it. And of course, as you rightly say, in 2007, what we did, we bought the junk. That, you know, it was a junk debt crisis, which was driven incidentally by the by an act under Carter. The name of it just escapes me now, but it was a politically driven motivation to degrade money. So you couldn't take out banking, banking due diligence. And so due diligence was taken back because it was based on, oh, color, you're repressing, you know, black people wanting houses, you're wanting this and that, so on and so forth. But of course, what happened was the idiots in the city, and I was in the city at the time, they were buying junk debt, which was being listed as asset backed. So they thought they were buying mortgages from doctors in Arlington, in Washington. They were actually buying trailers in South Chicago. This is happening, of course, with the ECB at the moment. They're saying, oh, we're buying asset back to the tune of something like 60 billion euros a month, or it was when I last looked. And of course, what they buy is VW or BMW finance bonds, so on and so forth, amongst other things. So, of course, the money isn't asset backed. It's into your next door neighbor's second-hand BMW. And this has nothing to do with asset backed here at all. It's laughable, but it should be blown out of the water straight away. And of course, sovereign debt's no better. I mean, who in their right mind would buy Italian sovereign debt? You couldn't invent the stupidity of this. But I had a colleague at my old investment bank, the Warburg Empire, and he said to me, and of course, all these things are governed by committee and groupthink. He said, the more intelligent and well-educated people you have on a committee, the more ludicrous the decision they will come to as a group. I mean, think about it. I found that in life to be very true. What do you want? Is one clever man on the committee and a load of dummies, so you get clever decisions. When everybody's got their neb ending, you end up with nonsense. And of course, so this must end. But unlike 2007, 2008, it was just about underwritable. Yeah. They could just about get away with buying and underwriting all the junk, which incidentally, of course, they did with taxpayers' money. And you quite rightly say, this business about central banks aren't independent. Of course they're not independent. If you elect and select and interview the manager of the central bank, you're calling the shots. So Mark Carney was recruited by Osborne, who believed in free money and free stuff because he's a politician. And it's the same with the Fed. It's the same with this is all about giving the politicians what they want, which is actually free stuff until the next election. And when you go into an election, the political party that offers the most free stuff is the one that gets to win. And of course, the reckoning is again pushed further down the road. All very, very sad, and all political parties do it, and they're allowed to get away with it with mainstream media. We haven't had a single general election in my living memory, certainly since the late 1960s probably, where the national debt was part of the debate before the election. We did not discuss it. We haven't discussed it, to my knowledge, for nearly 30 years, the national debt. It's not talked about. It's about who can spend most money on the most stuff. And frighteningly, the current Chancellor is no better. You would have think the first thing he does when he knows he's running up debts, the first thing he would do would be cut spending, which is what you and I would do. We'd cut our spending. We'd live within our means for a while till we could get back the equilibrium.
Yeah.
Of course, he's talking about more tax. He's talking about having to raise the tax threshold. We're already taxed the highest in 50 years. If you look at the taxpayers' allowance, it's the highest tax rate in this country. People think about income tax. They don't think about 20% VAT, the tax on petrol, the tax on booze, and all the other stuff. So if you're Middle England, and I'm doing a pod on this, in a week or two, because I'm crunching the numbers. What is interesting is if you are watching this clip and you are a man or woman on the average wage, roughly speaking, in and around the average wage, with your 1.7 kids or whatever it happens to be, and a mortgage and bits and pieces, ordinary Joe, what is actually happening? The government are taking at least 50% of everything you earn when you add it all. Well, we're going back to the Middle Ages. That's what your feudal lord would have taken. You know, in strict farming. Yeah, he would have taken that amount of money. It's 50%. It's quite extraordinary that nobody is squealing. And of course, what they do, nobody looks at the left-hand side now of their chit when they get paid. They look to see the right-hand chit to see what's gone into their bank. They've now lost the will to live or to even question how much tax is going on. New car, we had to replace our car last year, a very modest family car. The VAT was somewhere in the region of £4,500. The year before, we had to replace the windows on our house. You know, they needed replacing after 40 years. Same again, they took another £4,000 in VAT. That's before you get anywhere close to everything else the government are taking. And of course, another thing that you and I both know, which is counterintuitive, certainly to politicians or chancellors over the years, that raising the tax rate doesn't give you a pro rata increase in revenue. You can raise the tax rate and see your revenue go down. Now, the fascinating thing is I wrote to the Chancellor about this the other day in an open letter. Any junior intern at the Treasury can tell you that if you put up the tax rate, your revenue will either stay static or go down. Wealth tax in particular. People won't just hang around. If you're a very wealthy person in this country, you'll just bugger off. Classic example of that is the Brexiteers' great friend, Michael Caine. And if you read in his autobiography, which is a cracking read, incidentally, the last thing he wanted to do was to leave his beloved England. He didn't want to do that. It was only when tax got to the stage they were confiscating 95% of his income, he had to go. Where does Lewis Hamilton live? Your kinsman, member of your clan. Oh, I suspect he's not really. He was in Monaco. All these people, all the lovies, the Emma Thompsons, the Patrick Stewarts, all these lovies, Sir Richard Branson, all these, they don't live here. They don't live here. Of course they don't. They couldn't afford it. No, and that's under this regime. This is under this tax regime. Never mind special wealth taxes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, of course. The interesting thing is if you look at the figures over long periods, look over 100 years, in this country, at any rate, I can't speak for other countries, but you will find that you'll never be able to raise more from taxing people than about 35% of GDP, regardless of whether the tax rates are high or tax rates are low. There is a natural ceiling to what people are prepared to pay. In the 1960s and 70s, we used to have a war on the black economy, the free economy, I used to call it, the people who worked in order to keep the money that they themselves had earned. The more complicated a tax system is, the higher and more punitive the tax rates are, the more people are going to contract out of the system. One of the reasons why cryptocurrencies have developed is so that they can be kept beyond the long reach of the state. This is an ineluctable law of nature. In the 1980s, we saw massive reductions in tax rates, and indeed the abolition of various taxes. Nigel Lawson, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, looked to abolish one tax for every year that he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. We reduced the top rate of income tax from 98 pence in the pound to 40 pence in the pound. And the result was that the amount of money that the state raised in taxes increased exponentially. And the other thing is, as well, as the amount of money raised in tax increased, the proportion of that which was paid by rich people increased as well, because rich people made themselves even richer, and so they were able to pay more to the Treasury at reasonable rates than happened when the rates were unreasonable. So this again is not rocket science. I mean, it's obvious, actually, common sense. And we know from history over many different governments and many different tax regimes since the last war that this is the case. And if Rishi Sunak increases taxes, all he will do is ensure that the economy grows more slowly than it might otherwise do. And if taxes reach a certain level, as we know from the basket case countries like Venezuela, if you raise taxes beyond a certain point, then you actually destroy wealth and destroy income. And so you make people poorer. Of course, socialists are not bothered about that. So long as there's equality, it doesn't matter if it's equality of misery, then that's fine by them. But it's not fine by you, and it's not fine by me. What we want is a free country, a free economy, and a free economy is commensurate with a wealth-creating economy. And a conservative chancellor who doesn't understand that has no right to call himself a conservative.
Absolutely right. I used to be part of the, when I was in investment banking and consultancy work, I was on the sharp end of this, and I could understand throughout the 1980s and the 1990s how it worked. I was quite an expensive fellow in those days to hire. I was quite an expensive fellow. And I know that my clients would be, if it was a straight, flat 10 or 12% tax,
yeah,
they'd pay it. They weren't bothered. They say, look, I don't mind, Godfrey. They say, I do not mind giving 10 or 12 or even 15%. Okay, I can live with that. My family can live with that. I can live with that, etc., etc. But what was actually happening, of course, people would start a business. They'd probably go 3 years, and you'll have people watching this clip who've been in this situation. They'd go 3 years earning nothing to build a business. So there'd be nothing, not even the minimum wage. They'd be earning absolutely nothing for 3 years. And then the business would get to motor a little bit, and it would get better and better and better over 4 or 5 years, perhaps, if it was a reasonably successful business. Then what does the government want? They want employment tax. They want national insurance. They want PAYE. They want and corporation tax. They want all these taxes. And this guy scratches his head and says, I was better off when the company wasn't quite so successful. I was better off when it was just me and the dog, working in the behind the garage. I was better off. Now I've got people working for me. I've got a secretary. I've got a PA. I've got an accountant. By the time they're all paid, all this is done, there's nothing left for me. And I've been in this situation myself. And it doesn't work. A flat tax people will pay. They'll say fair enough. But they won't set up family. But now they set up family trust. If he increases inheritance tax, every ordinary punter now pays inheritance tax. All you need, I've just had an old client, because I was a trustee. I'm going back 20 years. I was a trustee. She's a successful surgeon in Oxford. Yeah. Her parents were hardworking, just recently died in the same year, very tragic. Her inheritance tax was £500,000. £500,000. and we'd moved an awful, lot of bits of stuff here and there away, but I retired 20 years ago, so I wasn't keeping my money. But £500,000 from an ordinary middle class family whose daughter was a doctor.
Yeah.
£500,000. But of course, they lived in Harrogate. They had a nice house in Harrogate. Well, that swallows up your inheritance allowance straight off the bat.
Of course.
So that's gone. Any savings you've got, anything left, then is hit. But it used to be, estate duty used to be for the very wealthy. Now it's for the man in Acacia Avenue. Yeah. You can't go on. Then they'll get trust, they'll get advice, and you'll get less inheritance tax. You will always get much less tax if it's high, because everybody knows about it. Even the middle classes now know that they can't leave their kids anything without wrapping it up in some way.
Yeah. That's certainly true. I mean, the Tories under Osborne, of course, began this rake's progress. I mean, just look at the way he buggered up the property market by what he did to stamp duty. And that's symptomatic, I think, of the retreats from common sense in the Conservative Party on the areas of tax and finance. As you rightly say, estate duty used to be a tax on the rich. That's why it was brought in by Lloyd George all those years ago, a land tax. But of course, the paradox of this today is the rich don't pay inheritance tax because they can employ clever lawyers and accountants to navigate their way through the labyrinth of concessions and so on, which ordinary people can't do. There's nothing you can do. If your principal asset is your family home, then there's no way you can shelter that from the coming liability. I mean, James Dyson is a great man, massive entrepreneur, but why is he the largest landowner in Britain today? It's because, presumably, agricultural land worked as a farming enterprise is exempt from inheritance tax. By all accounts, he's running a highly successful agricultural business, but yes, he can afford to shelter his assets from the great big shovel that the Chancellor of the Exchequer wants to put into his stores. And ordinary people don't have that facility. So the rich get richer and the poor get screwed, as always.
I don't hunt now. I used to hunt with the Brocklesby, and he owns half of Lincolnshire.
Yes.
Yeah, which is why agricultural land, and he's not alone, of course, and I'm not blaming him, incidentally. You've got agricultural land going at £10,000 an acre, and the yield on agricultural land is about 0.05% in a good year. That's not the real value of land. That isn't the real value of land.
No, quite.
It's the whole thing has become a tax gambit. So it also means that you can't get into farming. Your little man who's a farm manager can never ever get to buy his own farm, as you say. The really gets, and if they stick a couple of useless wind turbines on it, Neil, nice work if you can get it.
No, nice work. That's another story which we'll have to explore in another interviews.
But the thing is, with getting back to UKIP, because obviously you can imagine I wish UKIP well. I was a founder member, or as close to a founder member as could possibly be. And some of the nicest people I ever met were with UKIP, not the hierarchy, who in the main was stinkers, but the ordinary guys you met. And I never refused a branch meeting. I went everywhere, down south to the Isle of Wight, across to Liverpool. I never said no. I never said no to visiting a branch as long as they could guarantee a reasonable turnout, and most of them went to the trouble of doing so. Some of the nicest, most patriotic people that I've ever met in my life. Outside the sergeant's mess, that is, which I couldn't get into because I wasn't clever enough. I had to be an officer. But no, really nice people, and they deserve a better shake. They deserve a better future, and nobody is offering it to them. No, none of the big parties. And I did. This will make you laugh, Neil. I was giving a lecture at Cambridge University last July, and I was banned. I was banned by the faculty because they thought Godfrey Bloom's lecture on the administration of Lord Salisbury in the 1890s is too radical for the new Cambridge mind. Work that one out.
Yeah, indeed. Well, as Disraeli said, the university should be places of light, liberty and learning. Well,
yeah.
not places of liberty and very little light today. And, and some of the rubbish that's taught in the economics department certainly couldn't count as learning. So Cambridge is one of my old alma maters as well. So, although I didn't do economics there, but it's true. I mean, universities came very close to closing down free speech. Cambridge, there's been very recently, a fight back on this, and not before time. It's outrageous that anybody should be cancelled. This cancel culture is pernicious. And now, going back to something that was said earlier on, far more dangerous than that is the way the tech-tators, the people like Zuckerberg and Dorsey and the social media titans are trying to impose a personal censorship of their own upon the whole world. And the clash of ideas is absolutely central to a free society. And it shouldn't be for anybody to censor what people say, so long as they don't provoke violence. Free speech is vital to us all, and we should do everything we possibly can to protect it, whether the danger comes from government or from overweening individuals who think they know what's best for us.
Yes, it's sad. In fact, just early on today, my techie colleague Patrick he's fixing me up to get on to Gab. I lose 500 followers from Twitter a month. They just disappear. Nobody can tell me why.
Yeah.
And I probably put on 600 or 700 on Twitter. This is just, and I'm a little guy these days. I'm not an important person anymore. What are they doing mucking about with me? Can I really damage Cambridge undergraduates? I was banned from Stirling University, and do you know what I was advocating? I was advocating Scottish independence. That was my lecture on how they could do it under Austrian school economics, how the Scottish economy could actually, but banned. I mean, it's just fascinating, isn't it? That and the kids wanted to be there. I hired a hall outside the off campus, which was crowded. But what is it? What is the fear of open debate on everything? The whole
an idea, of course, and ultimately ideas are much more difficult to control than armies. So perhaps they're right to target you in this way, because people who have the golden key to guide us to how to open the door to perception and reality are very dangerous people. When governments want to tell lies and perpetuate those lies, they don't want people to understand the truth. So I think that's why you've been targeted.
Well, it's very flattering.
Well, who can doubt it, Godfrey? Who can doubt it? But you're absolutely right that we do need a political vehicle to propagandize for the truth, where none of the establishment parties has the slightest interest in doing this, because they're all gangsters ultimately in the same business, and it's just one mafia family attacking another when the general election happens. And we need a grassroots movement like UKIP, because what you described as the way UKIP started, it mushroomed up as a spontaneous organization. It was not something that was created by somebody having an idea of an organization and imposing that upon people. It developed naturally. And that's what I think is real politics. The Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, all these parties, they're just bureaucracies which have been taken over by a small number of people, and they're used for their own ends. What we need is an organisation that speaks for the people and is comprised of ordinary people, and that's what I hope UKIP can return to.
Well, so do I. And we got up here in Yorkshire, when I was running Yorkshire in 2014, UKIP got 400,000 votes. And we went from nowhere, no organization, nothing in 2002 to 12 years later, 400,000 votes. And it wasn't just Yorkshire, it was everywhere else. And if I may just suggest, very few people up in Yorkshire watch Question Time. It was grassroots. It wasn't because somebody went on Question Time at bloody midnight. It was because it was real people on the streets in all weathers. And there's never been enough tribute to these people, these lovely people. It's all been that, you know, me, and I did this, and I'm terribly clever. It isn't. It was grassroots people that did that. It was hard work when there was no hope, Neil. In the early days, there was no hope for Brexit and UKIP. Yeah. And it was ordinary people that did it, and their own savings they put in as well. There was no money, there were no donors. A few donors came in later, very much later, but it was our own life savings that we put our hand in our pocket in. Yeah. Sorry, got a bit emotional with that one.
Yeah, I remember very well. I mean, I joined UKIP in 2002, but I joined the Anti-Common Market League in 1967. So, you know, I've been fighting that battle for the whole of my adult life.
Good for you.
And it's a tragedy how UKIP squandered this huge opportunity which we had after getting 4 million votes in the general election in 2015, having been instrumental in winning the referendum in 2016. You know, we should have been the third force which British politics
exactly. We should be. UKIP should have been number 3 in the House of Commons, with a very significant footprint in the House of Lords. Yeah. Squandered. You're quite right. The word is quite right. Squandered that position. It was a bit like watching the Calcutta Cup a few years ago and watched England 40 points ahead, and just when the whistle blew at the end of the game, it was 40 points apiece or something. You know, how to squander a lead. Yeah. Appalling.
Yeah. Well, in 2016, just weeks before the referendum, we got 12 or 13% of the vote in the Welsh Parliament, as we now call it, elections, and we elected 7 members out of the 60 Assembly members. It was the Welsh Assembly at the time, and that could have been used in the regional stroke national example of Wales for UKIP to occupy a pivotal position, in the same way as UKIP at Westminster could have occupied a pivotal position if it had been developed in the right way. But I'm afraid egomania, selfishness and vanity on the part of a handful of individuals got in the way, and it was snuffed out effectively. And Ersatz alternatives founded by the same people are now on offer. So elsewhere, but we won't go into that today perhaps, but I certainly do want to restore the promise that UKIP originally had. And it starts by talking about ideas. UKIP started with one idea on Brexit, although we didn't call it Brexit 25, 30 years ago. But there are many ideas which we've discussed in the course of this conversation, and others which we'll perhaps discuss on other occasions, where none of the other parties is saying the common sense things, the ordinary truths that we understand. So that's, for so long as I hold my position at the helm of UKIP, that's what I want to try to do.
I did consider that the ins and outs are very complicated, but I was rather keen on actually, when we had agreed the end, you know, the referendum, that the party did actually change its name to the Common Sense Party. And I think it would have a resounding feel at the ballot box, because that's one thing people, it doesn't matter, you go, I mean, I'm a member of the rugby club, the cricket club, you know, I'm all over the bloody place enjoying a pint, as you very well know. And I'm getting the same feedback from everybody all the time. How many times have we said to you, there doesn't seem to be any common sense. No. It doesn't matter what you look at, reform of the NHS, high-speed rail 2, all these things, there is no common sense. And I think if that was on the ballot paper, or perhaps as a sub thing, you know, UKIP, the Common Sense Party, maybe, I don't know. But I'm sure that it would resonate, especially in Wales, because I think this idiot running Wales at the moment, Drakeford or whatever his name is, ghastly fellow, I think there should be a big turnout against him. And a lot of people won't vote Tory in South Wales. They'll never vote Tory, and it wouldn't do them any good if they did.
No. Indeed, the strongest support that UKIP got in Wales was in those old mining valley areas, and that's where the most resounding vote for Brexit occurred as well. Ebbw Vale, Michael Foot's old constituency, it's called Blaen
Yes,
Gwent. 66%, I think it was, people voted to get out of the EU in that constituency, and yet every single Labour member of the Welsh Parliament is a Remainer, an inveterate Remainer, and never accepted the result of the referendum either, and they've done their best to sabotage it and prevent us leaving, despite the votes of the people. And the people of Wales voted to leave it in the same proportions as the people of the UK voted to leave. But Labour isn't interested actually in ordinary people at the end of the day. It's a middle-class clique of woke quasi-intellectuals now, and hangers-on the public sector gravy train. That's all it is. They don't represent anybody but themselves.
I'm afraid so, and this is why I fear until we can cut there's nobody got skin in the game. Who's got lockdown? Get back to lockdown. People are locked down. Who is it crucifying? The self-employed, the small business, the medium-sized business. You work for the town hall. You don't care about lockdown. You just stay at home and watch daytime TV on full pay, looking forward to your index-linked pension, which has disappeared in every other sphere of institution. So the skin in the game, until I would make sure, I think it would be a moral thing for the Prime Minister to say, we are all going on half pay until lockdown is over. If you want to stand there and say we're all in this together, we've got to all be in it together. And that includes the public sector with a hand in the till. Everybody's going to say, we're all in this together. Let's all, I'll tell you what, we'll all be back at work in no time at all.
Yeah. Well, that happened in 1931. I don't know if you remember. Of course, we weren't around in 1931, but we're aware of what happened before we appeared on the planet. In 1931, everybody in the public sector was forced to take a 10% cut in pay in order to share the burdens which were being endured by the rest of the population. And there is a moral dimension in this. You're absolutely right. But it, of course, not fashionable to talk about morality these days, certainly not financial morality. When we have a government that is sedulously engaged in undermining the currency, and inflation is merely a disguised form of taxation, as we know, and an indiscriminate one, and one which is capricious in whom it affects the most. And generally speaking, it's the poor who have to bear the greatest burden. That is certainly true.
And of course, if I think the Taxpayers Alliance worked out that if you are in the public sector, you are now, all things considered, pensions and every aspect of these matters, a full 12% ahead of the private sector on average.
Yeah.
So I think we could go forward with a 20% reduction in all public sector, which would be not unreasonable, to bring them back behind the wealth creating sector. And also perhaps get onto the platform. A lot of people think the wealth creating sector, and I include some of the lemons at the Adam Smith Institute, think you have to be a captain of industry to be a wealth creator.
Yeah.
Your butcher, your baker, your sparky, your hairdresser, your cabbie, they are the wealth creators. Because anybody, you're either sucking out the wealth or you're putting money in. Yeah. We might argue that some of them are worth it. We might say, oh, well, he's a top surgeon, or she's a theatre nurse and she's working. We don't mind her, the wealth creating sector, funding them. Okay, fair enough. But of course, we all know that most of the public sector you could sack tomorrow morning and we wouldn't feel the draft. Does Sheffield Infirmary really need a diversity officer? Does Manchester Infirmary, Manchester General need 4 people in the public relations department, all on £50,000 a year plus. Do we really need £9 billion a year funding Public Health England to tell us to keep fit and not get fat, which is about all they do? The waste, the sheer appalling waste. I could save, and I've done it in writing, I've done it with Andrew Neil on his program in under 1 minute, how you could save £300 million a year off the budget without sacking a single policeman, a single nurse, single doctor. 300 billion easily with a swipe of a pen. We don't need these people. We don't need any of these people. Go visit the local town hall. It's, as far as I can see, offices like a bunny warren everywhere. Offices, little people buzzing about, doing nothing. But they're all on it. They're all having some.
Well, look at the BBC. Look at the BBC as another example of this. Television licenses now have to be purchased by the over 75s, what the BBC is going to do with the money, they're going to spend another £100 million a year on diversity and inclusion officers. So nothing to do with improving the output so that they actually put something on the screen that's worth watching. That'd be a nice thing once in a while, wouldn't it? It's all now going on woke causes, and nobody is more out of touch, of course, than the BBC. Well,
that's another Boris failure, isn't it? He promised that he'd look into this very seriously, and he said in his own words, there's no moral justification with scores and scores of free viewed channels that threatening people with prison if they don't pay. And I think the fact that people over 75 are now having to be charged is a red herring. Nobody should be charged in a free society. It's just not right. I don't watch the BBC. I don't want the BBC. The BBC is a whole can of shit as far as I'm concerned. Don't threaten to send me to prison for not paying them. It's immoral. Let's get back to this question of morality. It is not moral to make you pay for a channel you don't watch and don't want. And nobody I have ever seen has taken a moral dimension when they argue with this in debate. It's all about over 75s not being able to afford £150 a year. Sooner or later, we are going to have to discuss morality in society. We're going to have to discuss it. We're going to have to begin to discuss it, because if you don't have a moral society, you've got no kind of society at all.
Indeed. No, I agree. And you'd think this is a message, a political message, which would appeal to young people. Young people tend to be more idealistic than older people, perhaps. Although you and I think, are still pretty idealistic, although we're realistic as well, realizing that our idealism is unlikely to be requited at the end of the day. But nevertheless, the battle continues. And young people don't watch television as such. That's not the way in which they derive their entertainment, not the way they derive their information. And the number of young people who would be prepared to pay the television license, I should think you could probably count on the fingers of your hands. So perhaps this is a self-limiting problem in the longer term, but that's why, of course, the over 75s are now being brought back into the nets, because the BBC needs more cash to spend upon all the useless drones that they employ, not actually being as useful as doing nothing. They're actually spending their day doing things that are contrary to everything that we believe in and undermining the principles of a good society as we believe it to be. So yes, you're quite right. The television tax should be abolished, along with a lot of other taxes. That's another thing I want to get UKIP talking about, is simplifying the tax system by cutting out taxes altogether where they don't raise any real money, or all the complications, the concessions, which mean that some people gain at the expense of everybody else. Simplicity. There was a time when UKIP believed in a flat tax, for example, and that is something to which we've got to return, I believe.
Well, I had lunch with Alistair Heath in 2000, I think it was 14, and it was just a few weeks before our conference.
Yeah.
And I wrote an article for Money Marketing advocating a flat tax. And Alistair Heath picked up on it, and he said, if UKIP go supporting a flat tax, he said, I can assure you of support from the Daily Telegraph and plenty of others. He said it'll go big. You're the only game in town if you do that.
Yeah.
I was then approached by the UKIP party chairman, who told me I shouldn't have written the article because it wasn't UKIP policy. I didn't say it was UKIP policy in the article. I said it should be UKIP policy.
Yeah.
I was, and it's on the website. I was explaining flat tax. I think it might have been at Exeter, the conference. So it doesn't matter where it was. I think it was probably Exeter, but it's not important.
Yeah.
And everybody was revved up for it. The press were there to see what was going to happen, because this was something to talk about, which wasn't Brexit, which UKIP was always trying to dig out. Let's talk about something which isn't Brexit. What else? It's a one-trick pony. I was taken off the 2:30 slot and put into the 4 o'clock slot, and they waited until all the cables and all the TV cameras and everybody had taken them up and gone home. Then I was allowed on.
Well, that's politics.
That's the kind of problem that UKIP fell into in 2014. That's the kind of chicanery that was going on at the top, and I often wonder, UKIP stalwarts probably watching this, I often wonder whether the party chairman was actually working for the government, because everything he did was detrimental to UKIP at that stage. It didn't matter what he did, it was detrimental to UKIP. He was either monstrously incompetent or he was working for the other side. And I don't think he was incompetent. I think to this day he was working for somebody else.
Well, you have to ask yourself, going back to the point I made earlier on about why the opportunity we had only 5 years ago was completely squandered. You really have to be monumentally incompetent or stupid to have allowed that opportunity to fall from our grasp. Truth is sometimes stranger than fiction, isn't it? And the corollary of that is true as well. That what you think is an utterly absurd, fantastic idea eventually gets taken up by somebody, and however nonsensical, it becomes part of government policy. So there seems to be some sort of rule of nature here which turns everything on its head. But I do think that if we could establish UKIP as the voice of common sense, as you were saying earlier on all these issues, and even though people switch off perhaps or don't understand economic concepts when they're mentioned, nevertheless there are fundamental simplicities here which everybody can recognize and understand. I mean, Ronald Reagan was no great economist, but he did understand what I just called the great simplicities, and Reaganomics became the order of the day, and he transformed the United States and the United States tax system in the same way that Thatcher did in Britain. But of course all that has now been put into reverse. But those two individuals happily coincided in the 1980s, and the United States and Britain, the Anglophone countries, who seem to have a much better idea of common sense and the way the world works than those that short distance across the channel. If we were able to march in step, we can't do this now under President B-Day, of course, in the United States, but if we had an opportunity where the United States and Britain and the other Anglophone countries in the world were able to march together to a free market future and a libertarian future which focused upon the need for a small state and to maximize people's right of individual initiative and to keep what they earn, then how much better our world would be.
Well, of course, that's where we go back to Lord Salisbury and the most successful Conservative administration in history. And of course, one of his favorite quotes, one of the things I like most, is that it is the role of government simply to facilitate the entrepreneurial expertise of its people. No more, no less. And defense, of course, of the realm. But that's it. It isn't difficult. and I wrote my open letter to the Chancellor a week ago, but it got on a magazine blog thing. It got over 30,000 views. 30,000 people can understand. Yeah. People can understand. People aren't stupid, which is what this government always makes a mistake, and the Labour Party particularly. They think working class means stupid, and it doesn't. They know how many beans make five. I get more sense from my window cleaner on Brexit and the economy than I do from my friends who read law at Oxford, who haven't got a clue. Because he's an ordinary working Joe. He's not daft. He didn't have a benefit of public school education or Oxford, but he's a damn sight cleverer than some of the tosspots I have to deal with who are supposedly my friends. But it's a little easy thing that you can do with that little phrases of this nature. And mine went viral about a year or two ago, 2 or 3 years ago. We know that charities are being politicized. We know that charities are no longer what they were. Little old ladies give £1 into the rattle tin. And of course, the chief executives of these are on huge salaries. And the golden rule, never give any money to a charity if the chief executive earns more money than you do.
Very good idea. Yes, indeed. That's absolutely right. I mean, these are big businesses now. I mean, a charity so-called like Oxfam is a multi-billion-pound business worldwide. And no doubt they do a certain amount of good work. But what proportion of the money that is spent actually goes on the objects of the charity? And how much goes in the pockets of the people who work for it in one shape or form? Of course, international organizations like the UN, who masquerade as humanitarian organizations, they're even worse than the third sector ones. We know from the child abuse scandals of UN people in Africa, and seeing the great Humvees driven by UN staff in some of the most desperately poor parts of the world. It's disgusting, actually. Going back to what you were saying about morality, what's the morality in an organization like that? When you think of the misery and squalor amongst which they work, whilst enjoying sybaritic lifestyles that simply couldn't be dreamt of by the people that they're supposedly to try and help but fail to do.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground, Neil.
We have, and we'll have to do this again, and
let's see how the next month develops, and meet again, because more will be coming out of the Brexit scam. More will come out of the lockdown scam. Every week that goes by, more scum floats to the surface, and it'd be interesting to have a look at it and see what colour it is.
Certainly. Well, certainly Brexit is unfinished business, big time. And I know we've accepted this so-called deal because it's incremental. You know, we bank what we've got, but there's still more to do. And there's fishing, there's Northern Ireland, and who would have thought that we would accept a situation where an artificial border can be created in the middle of our own country, and that Northern Ireland remains under the tutelage of Brussels to a great degree. The extent to which we're going to use the freedoms which Brexit ostensibly gives us to diverge from the sclerotic environment of the EU. That's another unfinished battle. I've no faith whatsoever that this Conservative government has any intention of dumping the detritus which we've had foisted upon us by Brussels over the last 50 years. But if we're to make a success of Brexit, that's absolutely essential. There are so many things that we need to talk about in relation to Brexit that still need to be done.
Right, we'll finish it there then. It's been most enjoyable, as it always is. It would have been more enjoyable at my club over lunch, of course.
Well, I'll bank that one for the future.
Yes, indeed.
Well, if we're ever allowed out again, if they watch this podcast, I think we'll have a personal warrant to ensure that we stay in lockdown at your house and my house forever.
Yeah.
They
Love
realise
to everybody in Wales when you get there.
once they realise that we're coming for them still, even at 71 years old.
Yeah, no, there's still plenty left. There's plenty left.
Very good. Excellent,
See
Godfrey.
you
Well,
soon.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.